Pascal, and good morning, everyone. Um, I'm standing in front of you, to present my topic of PhD proposal: predictive cues to monitor learning, the facilitated role of dialogic peer feedback. My name is Babu Noushad. Pilaparambil. Sometimes it'll be difficult to pronounce it all together, but you can call me Noushad. And I've been supervised by a fantastic team by Dr. Annick De Bruin, Pascal Van Gavan, and Stephen Dunning from the US. And the fourth one is me with a picture. I'm standing in front of you. I'm an optometrist working in Oman, originally from India. I've been into optometric education for the past 13 years. And my teaching focus is basically the undergraduate education and their preclinical training, the theoretical and practical courses. Right. So just to start with the presentation, because we often reflect on our performance that is natural, that is human, and all of us want to improve by ourselves. So if you really want to improve by ourselves, we should be able to monitor our performance and then go with the or we have to devise the techniques or the aspects to improve our performances. So Nelson and Annis described this as a cyclical process. Okay, we'll be keep on monitoring our performances, and with the input what we get from the monitoring, we'll be devising the regulatory processes. And again, as we go to the next level, we'll be again keep on monitoring our performances, and it is cyclical. And that is how, in a slow way, we'll be going towards the mastery. So this quality of monitoring judgments are hence it's very important, because that is how or those decisions only will be helping us to regulate our learning. And but if you look at the judgments, judgment errors are very common across in all facets of life. Doctors make diagnostic errors, and teachers even make mistakes in assessing the performance of students, and even students, they make even judgment errors in while making learning decisions. So why these errors are happening? That is coming into the theoretical framework. Courier described utilization framework to explain this. So the reason why these monitoring errors are happening is we are not having a direct access to our cognitive system. We'll not be able to, suppose if you learn a couple of new terms, we'll not be able to really go into a cognitive system and check it whether we have learned it, or will be able to really produce it in an upcoming test. So we do not really have that access. So we'll be depending on information from within, different type of information that comes as cues or heuristics, and based on those information from within, we'll be taking a judgment or decisions. So the variation of these cues, and as well as the way how we choose the different cues, are causing this error. So if you look at the monitoring accuracy, right, so it is fairly less if you look at the correlation between our monitoring decisions and the performance. Okay, the correlation is very low. Now, so researchers have worked on it, and they came up with certain strategies or certain interventions that would help the learners to improve their monitoring performance. So they come up with a technique called a cue prompt interventions, certain interventions that will help learners to identify cues that is more predictive of their performance. A few examples are like preparing summaries. Once after they read through a text or learn through a text, prepare a summary, and that is how they give information about how much have they learned. And like generating keywords, that is the essence of a text that have learned, or doing self-explanation once after they complete the learning, and constructing concept maps, or to come up with their own concept maps once after they learn a set of concepts. And the last one is the completing a pre-structured diagram. Okay, so based on the text what they have studied, okay, students or learners are given empty boxes, okay, to fill in the diagrams, so that once after they fill in the diagram, how well they'll be able to fill in the diagrams, they'll be able to make or to get some cues out of it to decide on their performance. So I would like to focus more onto the last one, the completing a pre-structured diagram. And this is a typical example of a pre-structured diagram, which I've taken from the study of Van Loon et al. And if you look at that, this is cause and effect relationships of botulinum toxin injection. And if you look at that, these Botox injections can cause less muscle contraction and less wrinkles, and this can in fact cause the people look younger and people can get another face expression. So this is the cause and effect relationship of this concept of using botulinum toxin. So when learners are given this diagrams, which is a pre-structured diagram which they have to fill in by themselves once after they've learned it, so how well they'll be able to fill in these diagrams will possibly give them a cue or information about their learning. But if you look at the cue diagnosticity is nothing but how well or what extent a cue can able to exactly predict a performance of the future performance. So, but if from the previous one, if you observe, the cue diagnosticity has been improved, but it is not improved to a level where it is a perfect option to go ahead with. So now, why still the cue diagnosticity is still it is not coming up to the an acceptable level? So the hypothesis is that possibly the learners are not able to effectively identify the cues or the useful cues or the predictive cues of their performance, or sometimes learners will be using these cues that are less predictive. So this clearly tells that learners are in a position they're not able to take a decision by themselves, and that could possibly a reason, and that was a reason we can introduce something, a concept of feedback, because feedback is an information provided by somebody else from as an expert or from a peer or from other sources. So these feedbacks are expected to improve the performance. Because when we look at the different types of feedback, there are performance-oriented feedback and process-oriented feedback. Performance-oriented is nothing but once after we ask somebody to do a clinical test or a clinical procedure, and then giving a feedback about how well have they performed. Okay, and another type is process-oriented, when people or when students or learners are engaging through a process or a test, when they are actually performing, giving a feedback at that process level, which would be much more better than giving a feedback on based on their performances. And also Carlos et al. Described that feedback, it has to be a dialogic process to have more sustainability and effect of it. And also, if it is given in a social interaction or within their social groups or within an area of where they can trust and they can have more comfortable learning environment that will enhance the learning performance. And also I would like to mention about whether the feedback has to come from an expert or it is from a more capable peer. Considering the context, and especially if you look at the learners, most of the time or almost every time, when we need a support, if we want to clarify something, we generally we'll do it by ourselves first, and if it is not, we are not able to get a proper response, we tend to go to our peers, and then discuss with them, and then later only most of the time we'll be going towards the an expert. So, and especially in the context where I am working, where our students are more working within a group, and they'll be able to or they are more comfortable in doing an interaction between each other. So feedback can be an effective strategy that can enhance the performance of the utility of this diagram completion task. So that comes into my research questions, 2 research questions. How do learners generate useful cues? So we are trying to focus on how do learners generate the useful cues when they are engaging with cue prompt interventions like diagram completion task. And if the diagram completion task and the generation of these cues and utilization, whether if we'll be able to make it better using a dialogic feedback from their peers. So that brings it to study 1. Study 1 and study 2 will be focusing on how learners are going to generate the cues when they are engaging with these cue prompt interventions. Participants are undergraduate health sciences students. So since we are focusing on the process of generating the cue, we'll be using a technique called think aloud. When students are engaging with the task, when they are going through the diagram completion process, okay, the cognitive process, okay, when they are actually engaging through the work is being done through a think aloud technique, and think aloud typically has a concurrent think aloud as well as a retrospective think aloud. Since we have to focus more on the working memory, we'll be following the concurrent think aloud technique, and we'll do the analysis using a process analysis and thematic analysis. And taking to the study 2, which will focus how learners are choosing, okay, from the available cues from the cue property interventions, how they choose the useful cues that can predict their learning. So here the learners will be continuing their think aloud process and will try to identify, okay, how well they will be able to identify and then decide which cue is going to be useful for their or to predict their performance. So we'll be doing a thematic analysis and also the prediction of performance using a cue diagnostic technique. Study 3 focuses on, okay, how feedback from the peers, okay, will be affecting or influencing to improve the generation of these cues. So it is an experimental study where we'll be having experimental group and control group. Okay, we'll use a learning session and with the diagram completion task, and a group, the experimental group, will go to the peer interaction, and the control group will not go through the peer interaction. Okay, they'll be doing a filler task, okay, which will still be preparing on, okay, what exactly would be the filler task, and then they will make a learning judgment, okay, a prediction of their performance, and this will be checked to estimate the monitoring accuracy using a performance test at the end. And study 4, we are specifically looking at how the feedback provider, when they are engaging in these activities, okay, how this is influencing his or her level of monitoring accuracy. Okay, so it will be again the same procedure. Okay, the feedback provider, after the peer interaction, they will make one more prediction of their performance, and then the performance test will be conducted to find out, okay, whether the cue diagnostics has improved or not, and also to understand the process, the cognitive process of them engaging with the peer interaction. That will be tested using a stimulated recall interview. So that gets into, though the time is very quick, I would just quickly acknowledge people who have supported me, because I'm coming from an environment which is resource limited environment. So people who are during my MHP, Dr. Ingrid and Dr. Mohammed Iraqi, okay, who are the one who were supporting me throughout and guiding me throughout, and my dean from the University of Brahmi, okay, who gave the permission to be a part of this program. Thank you.